You are listening to Movies to Watch Before You Die, episode number 5. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Movies to Watch Before You Die, the weekly podcast that breaks down the most important movies ever made that will change the way you think, change the way you feel, and hopefully change the way you live your life. I am your host, Mark Yazica, and with me today is my wonderful friend, Mike Kooknick.
Hello.
Hey, Mike.
Here I am.
What movie are we watching today?
We are watching Moon from 2009.
That's right. Moon, starring Sam Rockwell, directed by Duncan Jones.
Mm-hmm.
So if you haven't seen the movie yet, go see it. Pause the podcast, go watch the movie. It's kind of important. You can check it out in the links in the description. I'll provide it below. See if you can rent or buy it, or you can go to your local library. Check that shit out there for free.
Yeah.
Because Moon's definitely a movie you need to see before you die, and there's lots of good content we're going to be going over today. Lots of spoilers, so please watch the film. So let's get into it. Mike, let's start with your general takeaway. Just watch the movie. What are you thinking? What are you feeling?
Well, I'm thinking I first saw this movie when I was in high school or so, maybe middle school, high school, and I really liked it. It blew my mind. I was blown away. It was the first real space movie I ever saw.
Yeah.
Other than Apollo 13, which was a great movie, but it was a historical pick. So
right.
But yeah, I was totally amazed, and the twist really threw me.
Yeah.
And this is the second time that I've seen it. It's been, of course, many years. And it was still great, but it wasn't as great as I remember. And I'm not sure if it's because I knew what was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I knew sort of how it all went down.
Yeah.
But there was still, looking at it now, it had a different effect on me. And I appreciated the storytelling of it. Yeah. And the sort of the crafting of it a lot more.
Yeah.
And after thinking about it and dwelling on it for a little bit, it's sort of, it took some previous themes and ideas and looks from isolation movies, specifically space movies. 2001 is a big one. And then it sort of was a little stepping stone into these modern space movies, because right now we're having an influx of them.
Yeah, they're definitely coming back.
And I think that they have some respect to pay to Moon, as well as the ones from the past, but I see it as sort of like a link. Definitely,
yeah. It's definitely a stepping stone into some of the new films we're seeing. It's hard to say how much of an impact it has had, but definitely has had one, I would say.
Yeah.
Definitely an important film. And yeah, the film was not as profound for me the second time around. And I think a lot of that comes from, the sort of nuances and twists that come with watching it for the first time and taking all of that in. But that's okay, because I think I got more from it the second time around.
Yeah.
And I feel like I came to understand a lot of the themes and what the film was trying to say.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'll take that. I'll take that as a win.
Yeah.
Let's start first with dissecting the theme of the moon itself. So you mentioned other isolationism films. Many other films explore the idea of solitude and loneliness and isolationism.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that if that was one of the main themes they wanted to pursue in this film, that they thought to put it, to make it take place on the moon.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty interesting idea, because, you look at the night sky and the moon's just a staple of that sort of, image.
Yeah.
Just sitting up there, by its lonesome, dark and mysterious. We're not quite sure what's going on. And I mean, we've landed on it and we understand what it is, but it's still sort of mysterious in its own right. And the idea that this guy just lives on it and harvests from it is kind of crazy. And I also like the idea that not only is Sam on the moon and he's so far removed from humanity and people, but he's on the dark side of the moon.
Yeah.
He's not even on the side. He's that much further away from us.
Right. Yeah.
Which is, just more awful. And
right.
I feel like almost this is just beginning to set up the company that's hired Sam as if they're almost trying to stick it to him or to put one more nail in his eventual coffin. I don't know. What do you think?
I think that's a great way of looking at it, because the sense of isolationism is definitely not only a movie device,
Yeah.
to give the audience a feeling of isolationism, but it's a business tool that,
Yeah.
as you mentioned, the company sort of utilizes.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I didn't realize that until you brought it up. It is his isolation and him being on the dark side of the moon is very much a purposeful device set up by the company to ultimately make an efficient product,
Yeah.
an efficient production cycle.
Yeah. And it's really an awful way to look at it because,
Right.
you know, you're dealing with, you know, a human life.
Right.
You know, granted, it's within the cycle of clones that
Right.
live and die for 3 years, but still, you know, it's a little sadistic almost, or
Yeah.
there's some ill intent there, I think. But let's sort of delve into the idea of the solitude and the isolationism. So, I mean, first of all, we have this guy. He's on the moon for a 3-year stint, he thinks, and he really only has himself. He has Gertie, and that's someone to interact with. It's something to interact with.
Yeah.
And he gets these sort of video calls, but beyond that, he's left to himself, and you know, sort of his own devices.
Yeah.
And I've never even encountered something even close to being alone
Right.
for half a year, you
Yeah.
know, or
Yeah.
far less time than that. And to even fathom the idea of having to go through that for 3 is
Terrible.
unfathomable.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think that as much as a nicely futuristic movie this is, I don't think that is something that any company or any agency would ever put somebody through.
Yeah, I'd certainly hope not.
But it was a perfect little movie tool.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, it was rough for him, and all those little supplemental things to keep him together
Mm-hmm.
were almost making it worse. Like they were almost building him this narrative of false hope. The videos that he was receiving bound him to this family, and Gertie even bound him to this mirage, this fake state.
Yeah.
Which isolated him even more. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that the world that was built around him was all engineered to keep him alone.
Yes.
And that's the scariest part. The idea of being alone is scary on just the cusp of it.
Yeah.
But the idea that everything is working towards your loneliness and to support it and sustain it is the overall horror of the movie.
Absolutely. And albeit the fact that it was orchestrated by this company, by this business, to allow their product to continue to be harvested.
Yeah.
It's just awful.
Yeah.
Like I don't know how you could put somebody through that. And you know, we see the effects that this isolationism has on Sam. He talks to himself all the time. It might be a little off-putting at first, but we get used to it so quickly.
Yeah.
We just accept it as part of his character. He talks to his plants. You know, he spends all the time building the models,
Mm-hmm.
and he eventually starts to hallucinate, which is kind of upsetting because that's what leads the first Sam at the beginning of the film to have the accident and crash and cause the next Sam to be, you know, sent up from clone
Yeah.
land or wherever,
Yeah.
whatever you want to call that.
The freezer.
The freezer, that's much more concise. Yeah. I think the film also does a good job, you know, as I said, setting up Sam's identity. I think we get his character very quickly, and that's a hard thing to do sometimes in films, but I feel like I get who Sam is very quickly. And even going back to the business in the film, the organization sort of having it out for Sam, it seems almost as if the film has it out for him as well, because I think in the very first scene when we see Sam, opening of the film, he's doing the running with the song playing, and his T-shirt says "Wake me when it's quitting time," which is the same T-shirt or blanket or whatever we see in with one of the clone packages for whenever future people are awoken. And you know, if the business is providing this clothing for him, it's almost just like a fuck you.
Right.
Like, oh, you know, wake me when it's quitting time. Ha ha ha. Get it?
Yeah.
And that's something Sam has to live with that he's sort of unaware of. And he's running to the song "The One and Only" at the beginning.
Yeah.
By Chesney Hawkes, which
It's ironic.
it's just all of these little things, you know, like everything is stacked against this guy. from the beginning.
Yeah. Is it too much?
I don't think so, because in a lot of other regards, I think the film is almost underwhelming,
Mhm.
or lots of other. I think they could have utilized a lot more tropes throughout the film
Mhm.
to sort of continue to stick it to us, and continue to sort of turn that corkscrew, but they don't. It's a lot more restrained, and you're sort of left to deal with these overarching broad scope ideas and ideals and questions of morals and ethics, opposed to continued like edge of your seat, what's going to happen next.
Right.
And I think I appreciate that a
I
lot
agree.
more.
Yeah, yeah. The film definitely could have really put a lot of dramatic emphasis on his realization that he's a clone, and the difficulties with struggling to understand that and accept that. But they didn't, and they sort of spread out the pressure across the film in these little nuanced ways, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
Which I thought was great.
Yeah.
Because it's a really nice through line for the whole film.
It is. And I think I almost like it better because the whole time I'm asking these questions, and it's causing tension within me, because I want to know. I want the film to just tell me,
Right.
what does it mean to be a clone?
Yeah.
What sort of effect does that have on somebody? And in the one scene, Sam asks Gertie, "Am I a clone?" And
Yeah.
I felt so bad for Sam to even, because I can't even fathom what kind of a state of mind you have to be in to ask that question.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right. Absolutely. And I think that state of mind was, as we mentioned, of course, the whole film works to bring his loneliness up.
Mhm.
Then the idea of him being a clone was maybe so easily accepted because everything else clicked. Everything that we were realizing all along, this through line of loneliness and repetitiveness and cloning, just all fell into place for him. So it was like, of course I'm a clone.
Yeah. Yeah, and I am glad he was eventually able to accept it, but it's so darn upsetting that you have this guy who has nobody.
Yeah.
He literally only has himself, and he finally gets another companion, and it's himself.
Right.
Again, and he's already trying to work through the fact that he's been alone for 3 years and he's hallucinating, and he's definitely not okay in the mind.
Yeah.
And now he has this. Now he has himself to deal with as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and on top of that, if I could move to the next item here,
Please.
I thought it was really interesting the different levels of compassion and care that each version of Sam showed for each other.
Yes.
Even up towards the end when, they're each sort of deciding in their own way, whether explicitly or implicitly, who's going to return to Earth and who's going to stay and die.
Yes.
Really, they were both trying to do a self-sacrifice thing, but only one had the strength and I guess the mental fortitude to logically figure it out. It wasn't a question of willingness for either of them because they're the same person. They were both equally willing.
Yeah.
It was who was physically and mentally capable of just doing it.
Yes, and the film definitely made the utilitarian decision to, allow the more fit Sam to be able to go back. And
Right.
You can go back and forth on whether. I mean, I think it was the smart choice. And,
Absolutely.
That's definitely good. But even the fact that we see a dichotomy between Sam 2 and Sam 1. Sam 2 seems a lot more quick to anger than Sam 1 was, and so you sort of then begin to question: Are they really the same? What does it mean then to be a clone? If we sort of have these differences between people, are they different? If they are, is it because of the sort of time lapse between them?
Yeah.
Is Sam 1 simply just more hardened and lackadaisical because of the time he spent on the moon?
Yeah.
Or is cloning something that perhaps isn't as precise as we might have thought in terms of truly copying another person?
Yeah, I when I was watching it, I attributed it to the time he spent.
Right.
But I didn't rule out. I was actively considering, the differences.
Yeah.
And the ability to accurately replicate.
Yeah.
But I think it's easier to say that it was a result of the time he spent and the time alone because they made it so physically obvious in him how weak he was, how sick he was.
Yeah.
And if his mental state wasn't enough, his physical attribute cleared up any doubt.
Yeah, and I think I would agree with that. And Sam 2 also seems to go through a much more defined arc than Sam 1 does.
Yeah.
And that he seems to come to be more understanding of Sam 1's sort of state of longing
Yeah.
than Sam 1 ever seems to come to understand what exactly Sam 2 must be going through.
Yes.
And I don't know, in some regard that makes sense, because we start the film with Sam 1 and we watch his descent. He's already in his descent, he's nearing the end of his life. And then Sam 2 comes in and he's able to witness the end of that. And Sam 1 doesn't have as much to observe from Sam 2 because he's only just begun his life.
Yeah.
But also in the cycle of Sams that would have continually gone through their time at the moon, Sam 2 went through a cycle and a change within himself that none of the other Sams ever would have had to gone through.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think, is it safe to say then that Sam 2 went through a change, he experienced change, and he became who he did because of the environment he was in, or is he simply different? In this sort of nature versus nurture debate.
I think it's definitely a product of the environment that he was in.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that he was different at all. And again, we sort of saw that in how they both sort of competed for self-sacrifice.
Yeah.
In a weird sort of way. So I think that, like you said, he was fresh. He's fresh out of the freezer, and thrown into this environment that is automatically shaking. So when you wake up, you're expecting to do your job, and whatever memories he was programmed with, he remembers all those as his last thing.
Right.
But then you wake up and you see something else. That's worse than waking up and eventually realizing or eventually finding a clone like Sam 1 did.
Yeah, it's still ultimately unimaginable. But I guess the biggest takeaway for me from this entire sort of thought process is just applying these sort of questions to the real world on a larger macro level, and that can people then change over time, or how much of who we are or how much we change is caused by nature versus nurture. Of course, there's a much larger scope with real people, and we don't have to deal with meeting ourselves.
Yeah.
But the film still poses, I think, a legitimate question for us, one that I'm not sure I have an answer to.
Yeah, I mean, of course, that's an age-old argument of nature versus nurture. In terms of the movie, they were in a vacuum basically, and the idea of they had the same nature.
Yes,
so
literally.
So the
definition of cloning,
right? the difference was the experience. I think, as far as the movie's concerned, it absolutely answers nurture over nature, because, like we said, their experiences were so different, but they were exactly the same. That it goes to show how wildly influential your environment can be.
Yeah, and I think I would agree with that as well. Nature definitely sets up who you are and provides a sort of blueprint for who you are. And I think there's definitely limitations, and it creates a sort of core identity within you that will persist from the time you're born until the time you die. But I think much more of who you are exists in the sort of peripheries and your sort of peripheral identity that your nurture ultimately shapes, the sort of environment around you. And I think you're also a part of that environment, and that you're able to help sculpt yourself and sort of be a part of your change over time. What about the idea of being a clone and coming to that realization, and what that does to your identity? What would you do if you discovered you were a clone? Not that you had a clone,
right?
You were the clone. What's the significance in that, and what sort of reaction does that elicit?
I think the significance is everything. It's your whole world is not turned upside down, but something
turned right side back at you.
Yeah. Yes. The tables are turned
like a mirror.
Like a mirror. Just like a mirror. It would mess me up, and as far as sense of identity, it would be shattered. It would be gone, because your identity, of course, is your personal lens that you see the world through. And if your lens is a replica of somebody else's, that's a problem. If your timeline is the same as somebody else's, potentially,
It is.
That's an even bigger problem.
I felt the same way at first, and then I thought about it, and I think I've come to the conclusion that, you know, being a clone and what it says about your identity is, you know, it's almost an empty question. It was the first question that came to my mind when watching the film, but I liken it. Have you ever heard of Theseus' ship and the Theseus' ship paradox?
I don't think so.
Okay, so for those of you who aren't familiar with Greek mythology, there's this guy named Theseus. He was like a badass. He did a bunch of badass shit.
Sure.
Something with like a minotaur or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just remember the ship part. He had this great ship because he's a great badass guy, and it sailed all around like the Mediterranean Sea. But over time, you know, some of the planks began to rot, so they replaced the planks, and you know, some of the sails began to rip, so they replaced the sails, and crew members died, so they hired new ones, and yada yada yada. And after a long time, eventually the ship made its way back to Greece. It redocked, and no part of the ship that was a part of it when it left still remained.
Yeah.
The entire ship had been gutted and replaced, and the only thing that was the same was the title. The only thing it maintained was its identity of Theseus' ship.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in regards to what this paradox poses in terms of a question to us is, did the same ship return? So I look at it as, so formally, if you're just looking at the formal structure of the ship, yes. You know, it looks the same. It's the same crew members. The sails are the same. The planks are the same. You know, it still functions as a ship. But, you know, its numerical identity in that it's physically not the same ship that departed.
Right.
It's a different ship. You know, it's a clone of the original ship.
Yeah.
And I think for the takeaway for us in that is that in being a clone, formally, structurally, you're the same, but the fact that you are not the clone and that the clone is not you, I think there's something to be taken away from that. And there's a solace to be found within that.
Yeah.
And off of the sort of nature versus nurture debate, I think nature ultimately will set the stakes for the clone, who the clone is to be. So if I'm to be cloned right now, it'll be a replica of me. But the second we both come into existence and there's now a clone of me, I think nurture is going to allow us to become two different people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, you know, I think that's where we sort of have to find, you know, not that I have a fear of being a clone or becoming a clone.
Sure.
But, you know, when and if the problem arises,
Yeah.
this is the sort of thought process I think I will use to sort of come to terms with that and you know, be okay with it.
Yeah. That's really good. And in my head, the scenario when you posed the question was, this is really silly of me, but waking up one day and having like Mike standing over me, like, hey. But
I mean, that could still happen. Like,
right. Sure. But
like in that moment, this numerical identity bullshit would not bring me any comfort because that'd be fucking weird.
right. So I guess it really begins with, how do you find out you're a clone? Do you find out you're a clone because you see you'd have your
to.
clone, or does somebody tell you like, hey, like, listen, I know that you're a clone, and like you have 100% confidence in what this. I know that that's damn near impossible, but you have 100% confidence in what this source is telling you.
I guess I don't. I feel
because on to your point, the idea of nature immediately takes over. It begins with how you're told.
That's true.
Because those are two totally different experiences.
and
you'll have a different reaction. Your nurture will have a different reaction based on even that different.
That's something I feel like I would need to see it. I would need explicit proof. And even in the film, when Sam 1 and Sam 2 interact, they don't even first completely accept.
Right. Yeah.
Like
yeah.
the
yeah.
idea of being a clone doesn't come up for a couple scenes
right
after that.
Yeah.
Which I was like,
yes.
What
I was thinking the same thing.
You're interacting with yourself. Like,
right.
Do you not see this? And I guess it's not something that the brain immediately wants to accept.
Right.
You know, like that's not.
Yeah, and I think us and the rest of the audience who's ever seen this movie was thinking the same thing. Like, how has it been so long for you guys to just acknowledge it?
But I mean, I guess I get it. You know,
absolutely.
And especially if you spent so much time alone.
Yeah.
I think a lot of who you are is also the way in which you interact with people,
Mm-hmm.
and not interacting with people for 3 years. I think Sam lost a part of himself.
Right.
I think there's something to be said for that too.
And then the first person that you interact with is
It's yourself.
yourself, who's kind of equally deprived of
Right.
interaction.
Yeah. Okay, then let's turn the tables. What's the significance then in not being a clone? Is that dichotomy between being the clone or having a clone made of you? Is that significant? Is that important?
I think comparatively, yes, it's very important because I never considered it until right now that there isn't a clone of me in the sense of the question that you asked. What's the significance of not being a clone? And it makes your life all the more valuable.
Doesn't it?
I think so. Because if there's a clone version of me, it's sort of like the idea of an alternate universe. All right? So if there's an alternate universe right now where just on a surface level, let's say the job that I'm at right now, I didn't take that job, which was very possible. Like, what is that world like? And I can't even imagine that. And it's upsetting and kind of disturbing that, oh God, this is the path. These are the decisions. And that's it. I'm sort of just thrown out to sea for every little bit. And the idea of not having clone makes the decisions, puts a lot more weight on what you're doing right now and the decisions you're going to make, because there's no opportunity to see the alternative, and it's just you, and you can't rewrite the past.
That's true. I guess in terms of the way the film poses the question, in that the way we have two Sams interacting with each other at the same time, and Sam 1, although he tries to hide it, there's this air of superiority.
Yeah.
And I think it, and there's many other films that deal with sort of clones, and there's always this sort of unspoken rule that the original person who had clones made of him or her is ostensibly better than any or all of the clones. And if you really think about it, it's, a clone is still a breathing, living human being. They have all of the sort of memories and experiences of the actual person implanted within them. The only thing different is that they physically did not experience any of those things.
Yeah.
They didn't actually put the time in. But I feel like that's just a matter of semantics. I feel like, it's unimportant, and it gives a reason for the original person to just feel self-important and to give them something.
Right.
Because everything's a contest and everything's,
And that's a really twisted form of being selfish.
It is. And it's
really messed up.
It's the most selfish you can be, because you're comparing yourself to yourself.
Yeah.
And you still want to be better.
Right. It's insane.
It's silly. I mean, if you think about it.
Yeah.
Okay, so one last distinction, I guess, in regards to the formation of an identity, or even how the mind or the experiences can be implanted in a clone.
Yeah.
There's an interaction between Gertie and Sam when Gertie says, "The new Sam and I will be backdoor programming as soon as I finish rebooting." And Sam says, "Gertie, we're not programmed. We're people. Don't you understand?" And he says it with such conviction, and it hits him, in a very profound way. And even beyond the distinction between humans and AI, which is something the film doesn't delve into that much, but, there's a surface level there. Sam immediately needs to defend the idea that he's not programmed. And I think that's an interesting thing to defend, especially for as far in the film as this dialogue takes place.
Yeah.
After Sam's already sort of come to terms with who he is and what it means to be him.
Yeah, so the difference between people being programmed and AIs being programmed wasn't really a theme that was touched on, but I felt like there's ample opportunity for it to just be like, well, you were, Sam. Sorry, bud.
Yeah.
Because we were all thinking it. And again, it goes back to the idea of denial. And I wonder if it brings up, this overall question of you can never quite accept that you're a clone.
Yeah.
Or the depth of what that means.
Yeah, I think it goes back to sort of assigning yourself your own numerical identity. And I think the second you realize you are a clone, there's going to be a hailstorm of craziness going on in your mind. But, I think you need to latch onto the idea that, okay, well, I'm still thinking and I'm still perceiving and I still exist. So this isn't as deeply as an existential problem as I thought.
Yeah.
You know, and you know the fact that you can interact with your clone,
Yeah.
you're both experiencing things in two different ways. You know, if you're my clone right now and I'm talking to you, I'm having thoughts and feelings that you're not.
Right.
And we're already beginning to diverge, you know, forging two new identities. And I think there's a lot to be found in that.
Yeah.
But I mean, even back to the idea of Gertie, I think Gertie's great. I loved Gertie throughout the film.
Yeah.
And I think Gertie works so well as a device because we're used to the AI in these films to be set up as sort of, you know, malign, and they always have this sort of ill intent, and that sort of cold, calculating voice always has, you know, something bubbling underneath the surface to lead to,
Right.
you know, a character's demise. And Gertie ends up really coming through for Sam.
Yes, which was unexpected.
Yeah.
Absolutely unexpected, because the whole time I thought Gertie was going to turn against him.
Yeah, he was very, very Hal-esque from 2001, and
Yeah.
I was just waiting for Sam to be lit down by Gertie, and he wasn't.
Yeah, which is, if I can zoom out here for a
Please,
minute.
let's
It's
zoom out.
It's sort of a weird thing that us as audiences are doing when we watch space movies with AIs, because yeah, we all have the idea of Hal being evil, but think about all the recent movies with AIs. Think about even, you know, in our real life, the AIs.
Mhm.
Like, I expected in Interstellar TARS or Case to go haywire and just be bad. I expected in this movie for Gertie to be bad. We talk down about Siri. We think that Siri is plotting against us. Siri's a bitch. We hate Siri.
I do it. I'm sorry, I do it.
And it's strange. It is so strange, because at this point we know better.
Well, I think yes, but the point I think we've gotten to here is that, you know, we improperly have this negative opinion
Yeah.
of AI, and I don't. It's a potential problem. It's a potential threat.
Right.
You know, I guess all of these doomsday naysayers there might be something substantive there, but I don't think we have any reason to believe that as of late. And I'm glad that films such as Interstellar and Moon and others in recent years are beginning to put forth the idea that AI is not something that's, you know, terrible and should definitely be feared. Even the film AI, Steven Spielberg,
Sure.
began to sort of provide a sort of a emotional, humanistic aspect
Right.
to
Yeah.
that, which I appreciate.
Yeah, and you know, I'm very interested in AI and things like that, and one of the overall things that is always brought into the conversation is Asimov's laws.
Mm-hmm.
Familiar with this?
Yes, iRobot.
Yes, it was originally written by Isaac Asimov in the book Foundation.
Yeah.
And sort of that idea has been adopted by the tech community as that is the law. That's just the way that it's going to be, and that's how it's going to function.
Yeah.
And for the listeners that aren't familiar with it, there's 3 laws to it, and basically they all boil down to don't hurt humans.
Yes.
You can Wikipedia them and it'll spell them out for you, and they're great.
They are great.
But that's something that even in the 50s was proposed as, hey, like, these AIs, they don't have to be destructive. They can be helpful.
Absolutely.
At all costs, they will be helpful. That's how they're programmed. And to bring it full circle, you know, humans aren't programmed, so we don't know what it's like to not have dangerous thoughts. We can't fathom how computers cannot have destructive thoughts, but it's just the way that it is. And the conversation between Sam and Gertie is a perfect example of that. Is or sort of the table turning of it, of Sam saying to Gertie, "We're not programmed. Sam, you're right in some ways. Yes, you're not programmed, but you personally, you are programmed."
And I mean, even taking that a step further to be a little more difficult and metaphysical with it, I think one could also argue that the humans are in a way still programmed.
Sure.
I think, you know, we have no control over our nature. You know, all of our genetics we're born with. We don't really have a choice.
Yeah.
And a lot of our nurture, we're born into an environment, and I don't want to get too deep into this sort of free will determinism debate, but you know, I think a lot of who we are and who we become is ultimately a result of the environment we're in, of the world we're brought into. Yeah. And it's just sort of this constant programming that's happening to us.
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting dichotomy that we have Sam versus Sam the whole film, but also Sam versus Gertie and the sort of human versus robot. But moving to the end of the film, the last shot we have of Sam sort of hurtling towards space and the sort of aftermath that we hear begin to ensue afterwards, I could only help but ask myself, and you posed this question earlier, is it right what happened to Sam? Is cloning ethical, especially in regards to the way in which the cloning of Sam was handled?
Right.
Where do we stand on this morally?
I'm sure that maybe in our lifetime, maybe in our children's lifetime, this will be a real discussion that will have to be had by human rights activists.
Yes.
Different political and religious groups. It's certainly around the corner. And much like a lot of today's, political religious debate, I don't have an answer. I don't have an opinion, but I'd like to think that humans should be treated with fairness and equality, for sure.
I agree with that.
I think that's something we can all agree on, but the definition of a human is then slighted when when you're able to make a human. Is that a human?
Yeah, I think going back to again my notion of people being able to forge their own identities from even pre-existing conditions, from someone who's programmed like a clone like Sam was, I think the fact that we retain enough of an individual consciousness to be able to be molded or to mold ourselves into a different person over time, I think that grants us enough of the, I guess, inexplicable qualities that make a human a human. And so, if I had the ability to make a bunch of clones of this Sam person and put them through this hell on the moon, and the fact that they only live for 3 years is another moral quandary in and of itself. But I think I can safely say that what happened to Sam was morally and ethically wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have the ability to create life as profound or unprofound as life is in our universe, I don't know, but I know I cherish my life.
Yeah.
And I think I would like to extend that same emotion to other people and make the assumption that anyone who holds life, clone or not, would feel the same way.
Sure. Yeah. I'm kind of bringing it back to in my mind of, is even the very nature of cloning okay?
Yeah.
Because personally, I don't think that it's morally okay, but I'm not sure why I feel that way. I don't have any because
Yeah.
I just feel like that's a really great scientific power that we can discover and we can develop, but that's the wrong way to use it.
Yeah, I think my knee-jerk answer to is cloning itself right is no, but when I think about it for a second longer and I realize I have no reasons not to do it,
right?
I think it's something that then becomes morally permissible. I think first of all, there's this notion we all struggle with individuality and finding our identities and discovering who we are. And cloning ourselves immediately questions that and makes it that much more difficult for us to come to understand who we are.
Yeah.
And humans can be caring and loving and good and all those things, but we're also inherently selfish in some ways, and some people more than others. And the idea of having to share potentially an identity with someone else is troubling from the outset. I think I can see that. And we also hold our identities as novel, as unique. We're all beautiful little snowflakes.
Right.
Back to that sort of idea.
Yeah.
And while I think that's good for helping bring someone out of a slump they're in, or allowing them to understand the potential they hold as a sort of wide-ranging idea, I think it's kind of defeating. I think it eventually does more harm than good, and this could be an example of that. But I don't have any arguments or reasons why we would need to clone people.
Yeah, I was thinking about, if the debate is over whether cloning on surface level is good or not, then the question is why? Why are we cloning? For example, do you clone yourself to see what the hell would happen, or do you clone yourself in case of an emergency? In case something goes wrong with current you, do you clone yourself in order to live forever? Is that living forever? It's a whole nother can of worms. That's another podcast right there.
Is. I think the short answer is no, but
I agree. Let me ask you this surface level question: if you had the option to live forever, would you?
Just not die?
Just not die.
Not cloning. It's not
correct. Yeah. Even I'll throw in some greater incentive. You could pick, if you say, okay, right now, today is the physical form that I want to be in forever if I choose to be.
And I could live forever?
You could live forever. Would you do it?
Then I can't die? Like I physically, can I kill myself?
Sure, yeah.
I just wouldn't die of like natural causes?
Yeah.
Okay, as long as I have an out.
Yeah,
Yes.
you have an out.
Okay. Yes, I think I would do it. I might regret it someday, but I have that out. So,
Right. You have an option.
So yes.
Hmm.
Yes, I would do it.
Yeah, I would do it too. Because in a way, Sam was living forever.
I wouldn't consider that living forever, though. Yes, there would have always been a Sam living,
Yeah.
but flash forward 1,000 years. The original Sam on Earth has died.
Yeah.
These Sam clones are still running on the moon. He's still beginning from point zero.
Sure.
You know, and while different iterations of who he becomes might be happening with each new Sam that's woken up,
Right. Yeah.
I wouldn't consider that living in the vernacular that we refer to living.
Yeah, it's a loop.
Yeah. Okay, well, speaking of the original Sam, my last question would be, do we think the original Sam is aware of what's happening on the moon? And if not, would he care? Is that something that would be important to him?
Remind me if the original Sam wasn't in the video called it Tess.
Yeah.
When she was like an adult.
Yeah, Sam 1 called Tess, and she's like a teenager or an adult or something.
Right.
And she calls for her dad.
Right.
Which I would believe.
He's totally aware.
I would believe is the original Sam.
Right.
So you think he's aware of what's happening on the moon?
Absolutely. I think that he is not only aware, but he's like higher up management. Like he knows exactly what's going on. Absolutely.
I think I'm operating from the assumption that he was left in the dark, that he was cloned somehow without him knowing, and that as far as he knows, the company hired some other guy to begin the 3-year stint after he was done. But little does he know what's happening on the moon. And I'd like to believe that if he found out, he would be against it.
Right.
And that's solely because of the way in which both of the Sams interacted with each other on the moon, the clones, and we sort of get a feel for what his internal moral code of ethics is.
I think it was none of those options.
Okay.
I think that from the get-go, day one, of all of our engineers and astronauts working on this project, working in this company, somebody's going to be the guinea pig. Even when it was just paper and pencil stages. Okay, we're going to pick Sam. Sam agrees to it. Sam's all on board. I think it would be more beneficial to the company and the overall experience of everyone if Sam 0 knew he was going to be cloned. I still think he had to have been totally aware from day one.
I don't, after experiencing especially the way in which Sam 2 changes and we see what he's capable of as a person.
Yeah.
I think that's indicative enough of a reason that the very original Sam that we never even got to meet would have been completely against the idea of him being cloned and putting future iterations of himself through that potential hell.
Yeah.
And he might have had a different answer at different stages, either before or during or after his time on the moon, because he definitely changed a lot as a person during his 3 years up there.
Sure.
And coming back to Earth. But I'd like to think we got a good snapshot of who Sam Bell was, and I think he would have had a huge problem with that. But there's no way to know. This is really just a crazy little way to think about this.
Yeah. I'd be interested. It was one of the few movies where as soon as the credits hit, I thought I'd be interested to see a sequel.
Yes. Yeah, and I was a little upset it ended right where it did. But that was the story.
Sure. Yeah.
That was the story.
I get that. I respect that.
Yeah. Okay, guys, I think that's it for this episode of Movies to Watch Before You Die podcast. Thanks for joining me this episode, Mike.
Thank you for having me.
Talked about a lot of good shit, I think.
Yeah, it was good.
Pretty good discussion there. Pretty deep discussion.
Yeah.
Got some trouble sleeping tonight, thinking about my identity and all that stuff.
I'm going to fall right asleep.
That's good to hear. Thank you all for tuning in. I hope you all enjoyed the film and were able to take something profound away from it and put something towards your formation of your identity or something like that.
Yeah.
Again, you can check out the links in the description to find out where you can buy this film. It's definitely one you want to add to the old collection. And also stay tuned for episode 6 of the podcast next Thursday, where we'll break down the film V for Vendetta and discuss some cool topics like justice, morality, and the role of government. If you've not yet seen V for Vendetta, I think it might be in your best interest to watch it before next week so you can all follow along with the podcast. And if you already have seen the film, that's awesome, but maybe check it out again and refresh your memory. And as always, links for the film are in the description, so take a look and see where you can rent or buy it today. And finally, if you'd like to support Movies to Watch Before You Die, please consider signing up for a free trial of Amazon Prime via the affiliate link below. With Amazon Prime membership, you get unlimited free 2-day shipping, access to Kindle ebooks, and, most importantly, the ability to instantly watch thousands of movies and TV shows directly from Amazon's virtual library. You can get all of those things free for 30 days, and for every new subscription, Amazon tosses us $5 that goes directly towards making this podcast for you all every week. It's a win-win, so look for the link in the description there and get started today. And if you'd like to stay up to date on all things related to Movies to Watch Before You Die, please be sure to join our mailing list via our website. That's markgazica.com. Okie dokie, that's all we got. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next time.